Hey guys, in this experiment, I'm going to be giving you a walkthrough of some of the basic principles of solubility through an experiment where we dissolve sugar in a glass of water and salt in a glass of water. This experiment is super easy to replicate. Everything is really accessible. I'm sure you guys have sugar and salt in your own homes and you just need, glass and some water. So first we need to talk about what solubility is so then you can kind of understand our experiment more. A very easy way to understand solubility is to think of it as the ability of a solute to dissolve a solvent. So you might be wondering what a solute and a solvent are. Imagine you're making Kool-Aid at home and the Kool-Aid powder that you add to the water is the solute and the water that is dissolved in the Kool-Aid is the solvent. So just to review, the solute is the substance that is being dissolved and the solvent is the substance that is doing the dissolving. So in this case, the sugar and the salt are going to be the solvents, and the water is going to be the solvent. And when you successfully combine a solute and a solvent, you make a solution. So every time you're drinking Kool-Aid at home, you're drinking a solution. So now that we know what a solution is and what parts go into it, let's talk about the steps that it takes to make a solution. You first need to add solute to solvent. In the case of our experiment that we will be performing soon, we use salt and sugar as two solutes and we add them to water. So you can see your salt and your sugar here, and we're going to add them to the water. The water is the solvent. When you add sugar or salt molecules to a glass of water, the water molecules reorganize themselves so that the sugar or salt molecules can scatter evenly in the glass. After the sugar or salt molecules have spread out evenly in the glass, the concentration of solute molecules and solvent molecules tries its hardest to reach a point of equality. So what happens when a solution only has a little bit of solute, a perfect amount of solute, or way too much? In order to answer that question, let's look closely at saturation. So a saturated solution is a solution that can no longer dissolve any more solute, which basically means that there's going to be a point in this experiment where I'm going to add enough salt to the water where it can no longer dissolve the salt. And that would be a saturated solution. An unsaturated solution is a solution where the solution itself can dissolve more solute. So as soon as I add 1 spoonful of salt or 1 spoonful of sugar to the water and I mix it up and everything is dissolved, that doesn't mean that it can't dissolve anymore. There's still plenty of room in the water for salt to be dissolved. So a supersaturated solution is a solution that can dissolve no more solute, but it also contains way more solute than it normally would if it was at room temperature. And a way that you would make a supersaturated solution is if you were to heat up a saturated solution so it can no longer dissolve any more solute, and then you would add more solute to it, and since you've heated up the solution, it can now dissolve more solute, and then you've brought it past that point of being a saturated solution. So with this information, let's move on to our experiment. Okay, so the way that we're going to do this experiment is I'm going to use this spoon, and I'm going to pour some salt into the spoon, and I'm going to dump that spoonful of salt into the water. I'll mix it until all of the salt or the solute has dissolved in the solvent, which is the water, and then I'll keep adding more until the salt can no longer dissolve. This will show us the point at which salt is a saturated solution and can no longer hold more solute. And once we've done that with the salt, we're going to compare it to the granulated sugar. We're going to see which one is more soluble in water, basically. So let's go ahead and start with the salt. We're going to get our salt out. Just going to pour a spoonful. You're just going to dump it in there. Try not to miss the cup, apparently. And you're going to stir. One method that you can use to make sure that you've dissolved all of the solute in a system is to hold the glass up to a light and look underneath and see if you see any more particles on the bottom. So we're going to do that now, and as you can see, I've pretty much dissolved all of the salt. There's none sitting on the bottom, so we're going to go ahead and add our next spoonful. That's spoonful number 2. Okay, so if you guys want to see, It looks like all the salt has dissolved off the bottom, so we're gonna go for a spoonful number 3. Okay, so let's check and see how our 3rd spoonful is dissolving. We're gonna hold it up to the light, and you can come under here and you can see we still have some salt particles that are on the bottom, so we're gonna keep mixing until those dissolve. And as you can tell, it's getting harder and harder for the salt to dissolve because we are making it more and more saturated. And eventually it's gonna become a saturated solution where it can no longer hold any more solute. So it won't be able to hold any more salt. Okay. So this is still spoonful number 3. And I think we've got most of it dissolved, so let's go in for spoonful number 4. And I have a feeling this is going to be our last spoonful because the solute at the bottom is just not wanting to dissolve all the way. We're starting to see more and more little grains that get left behind, so we'll see. Spoonful number 4. Let's check and see. I've been stirring for a pretty long time now, so let's look at the bottom of this salt and see how much solute is left, because I'm pretty sure right now we've oversaturated the solution. So you can definitely see that there is a nice layer of salt sitting at the bottom. We definitely added too much solute. You can even see it from a side angle if you want to get like a side view of it. You can see that layer of salt, which is the solute at the bottom of the solvent. So we just brought the solution past its saturation point, and if we were to heat this solution up, the salt would dissolve, and then once it cooled back down to room temperature, you would have a super saturated solution. Okay, so let's do the experiment for the sugar and see how many spoonfuls it takes for the sugar to dissolve compared to the salt. Okay, so this is spoonful number 1 going into the sugar cup. Okay, so let's check on this and make sure that there's no solute at the bottom. Give it a little stir. It looks like we're all good, and we're gonna go in for spoonful number 2 now. Okay, spoonful number 2. Okay, so I've been stirring spoonful number 2 for a while now, so I'm gonna hold it up and make sure that there's no more solute at the bottom. So come over here and look at it. Okay. And now let's move on to spoonful number 3. So I think we're done with spoonful number 3, and I think all of the solute or sugar has dissolved in the water. So come look with me really quick. You see how there's no more particles on the bottom? There's no more solute, so it's time for spoonful number 4 of sugar. And remember, this is 4 spoonfuls of salt, and there's still salt on the bottom. It cannot dissolve anymore. So if salt can dissolve with 4 spoonfuls, then we know, if sugar can dissolve with 4 spoonfuls, then we know that it's more soluble in water than salt is. So I've been stirring spoonful number 4 of sugar, and it looks like all of the particles have fully dissolved. If you want to come look really quickly. And since this is 4 spoonfuls of sugar and 4 spoonfuls of salt did not fully dissolve, then we know that sugar is more soluble than salt is. But just to test it, to make sure, in case I did more salt than I did sugar, I can do a 5th spoonful of sugar, just to prove that sugar is more soluble in water than salt. So this is going to be number 5 for sugar, and we're going to see if it dissolves. Okay, so I just got done stirring the 5th spoonful of sugar, and it has completely dissolved. If you guys want to come look really quickly, you can see, well, there is a little bit of solute at the bottom, but it's basically pointless to stir it up at this point because we know that it is way more soluble in water than salt is. So what did we learn from this experiment? I've said it 1,000 times already. Sugar is much more soluble in water than salt is. But why is this happening? Well, the salt molecule is much less complex compared to the sugar molecule or sucrose molecule, and this means that it dissolves slower in water.